Parker never thought anything could surprise him. After all the years he spent digging through the harsh land, fighting heavy weather, broken machines, and the pressure of trying to pull gold from places most people would not even bother checking. But this time, the shock did not come from nature, or from the ground, or from some sudden disaster. It came from someone he trusted more than almost anyone else. Someone who had stood next to him season after season, through good times and bad ones. Someone he thought would never make a move without telling him first. That man was Chris, the quiet worker who had always been calm, steady, and loyal. Nobody, and truly nobody, ever thought Chris would be the center of a story like this. The moment everything began to change was quiet and easy to miss. It did not start with a big fight or an angry argument. It started with Chris looking at places nobody was paying attention to. While the rest of the crew focused on new cuts and fresh plans, Chris walked alone toward the edge of old ground that had been written off long ago. This was a piece of land Parker had stopped thinking about. He believed the ground was dead, drained, and no longer worth a single ounce of diesel. But Chris had always carried a different way of seeing things. He noticed small details, subtle changes, and signs in the dirt that most people ignored. That season, instead of following the team, he began walking the edges of the forgotten claim as if the ground itself was calling to him. Nobody else could see. At first, these moments were seen as small details in the background, something that barely caught attention. But over time, the moments added up, and some crew members began whispering. Something felt off. Something felt hidden. The truth did not come from Parker's team, though. It came from a contractor miles away who uploaded images of core samples taken from a spot that should have been abandoned forever. The pictures showed notes and initials written at the top of every sheet. The letters C, D, Chris's initials. Nobody understood why he was asking for core samples from a place that Parker had given up on seasons ago. The ground was supposed to be empty, dead, drained of all value. Yet the samples were anything but empty. They were rich, far richer than anyone would expect from that abandoned zone. Numbers so high that even the contractor thought the readings had to be an error. But they were not an error. They were real. This was the first major sign that Chris had been doing something in secret, something planned, something careful. He had been tracking this old ground for a long time, testing it quietly, gathering proof without anyone noticing. And then something even stranger happened. Satellite images showed machinery moving on the dead claim late at night. No one had a permit there. No one had reason to be there. Yet a machine was clearly digging in the dark. When fans online zoomed in, the outline of a pickup truck appeared next to the equipment. It was Chris's truck. The same dents, the same shape, the same small details that only someone who watched carefully would catch. And from that moment on, everything changed. Chris did not answer his phone for 2 days. During the same time, the crew noticed one of the dozers was missing. The tracks left behind made it clear someone had driven it off the main site. When the satellite feed refreshed again, the truth was obvious. Chris had cut a trench on the dead claim. A deep, long trench made by someone with real skill. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. This was not an accident. This was not a simple check. This was Chris digging with purpose. And when he came back to camp, there was dust on him that shimmered when light touched it. Not normal dust. Not something from any of the active cuts. Mitch noticed it first. He close, wiped a small spot from Chris's jacket, and stared at the sparkles on his fingertips. It was ultra-fine gold, pure light gold that clung to everything it touched. Gold from a type of ancient channel that nobody had believed existed in that abandoned zone. Chris did not explain where he had been or why he was covered in gold dust. He simply hung his jacket and acted like nothing had happened. But the crew knew better. Soon after, someone found 5 sealed buckets in the back of Chris's truck. When they opened the first one, thick streaks of gold shone right on top. Not flakes, Not tiny specks. Real pieces, heavy pieces. Every bucket was loaded with gold-rich gravel from a layer no one recognized. The gravel did not match anything from the active claim. It was older, heavier, richer. And then the real shock hit. The gravel matched the pay zone Parker had once dreamed of, the zone he had lost years ago, a zone rumored to hold more than 70 million in gold, a zone that had slipped away before he ever had the chance to mine it properly. And now, somehow, Chris had gravel from that exact zone sitting quietly in the back of his truck. That discovery spread through camp like fire. People whispered, exchanged worried looks, and waited for Parker to confront Chris. But the confrontation came from another direction. A clerk from the claim office arrived with routine papers and casually mentioned that she had seen Chris earlier that morning, filing documents as primary operator. Those words changed everything, because filing as primary operator meant only one thing. Chris had claimed the ground for himself. And not just any ground. He claimed the same $75 million zone Parker had once fought for. When Parker checked his email, he found a notice saying his refile attempt had been denied. Someone had beaten him by 8 minutes. That someone was Chris. The moment Parker read the rejection notice, the entire room felt colder. 8 minutes. That small slice of time stood between him and the ground he had once believed could change everything for his future. It was a ground he had chased for years, a ground he had talked about with pride, frustration, and hope. And now Chris, the man he trusted more than almost anyone on the crew, had beaten him to it. Not by accident, not by luck, but through careful steps that had been going on quietly for months. Parker sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen, trying to understand how he had missed all the signs. How had Chris been able to test old ground, drill new core samples, borrow equipment, cut trenches, and file claims without Parker noticing a thing? The truth hit hard. Chris had not acted careless. He had worked with the kind of patience most miners do not have. Instead of chasing quick results, he had followed small clues, tiny hints in the dirt, and pieces of old maps that Parker once trusted but eventually walked away from. While Parker moved forward into new grounds, Chris stayed connected to the old ones. And that connection brought him to something far bigger than anyone expected. But the shock did not end with the filing. It grew deeper when Parker confronted Chris at the edge of the old bench. Frost drifted across the ground, and the air felt heavy with everything unsaid. Parker did not step toward Chris with the calm of a man ready to talk. He came with anger wrapped in confusion, asking why equipment had been taken, why trenches had been dug, and why filings were made behind his back. Chris did not raise his voice. He did not fight back. He simply said, "You stopped believing in that ground." Those words did not come out bitter. They came out steady and soft, but the weight of them hit Parker like a punch, because deep down, he knew it was true. He had given up on the ground too quickly. When numbers dipped, when the wash plant slowed, and when the layers looked empty, he had trusted the maps more than the earth itself. A mistake that even the best miners sometimes make. Chris had not made that same mistake. He had kept watching the land, kept running quiet tests, and kept searching for something Parker believed was gone forever. But the words that froze Parker completely came next. Chris told him he had dug in the wrong layer. He explained that the ground had a false bedrock, something that could trick even experienced miners. It looked like the end of the pay layer, but under that thin layer sat the real channel, untouched and full of heavy, ancient gold. If Chris was right, Parker had abandoned the claim only inches above the true treasure. When Chris showed the photos on his phone, everything became painfully clear. The layers were clean, untouched, and stacked in a way that only happens when a channel sits hidden for thousands of years.
Gold streaks glowed even in the dim light of the phone screen. Parker felt sick. All those months he walked away believing the ground was dead. Meanwhile, Chris had been digging deeper, following the signs Parker missed and uncovering what might be one of the richest channels ever found on that land. Chris did not stay to argue. He walked away and prepared to run a test wash. He had enough pay from the trench to see if his theory was true. The wash plant he used was not a full-sized operation. It was a small setup made of borrowed parts and pulled
together with the help of a few workers who trusted him. When the engine roared to life, the sound echoed across the valley. It was the sound of someone ready to prove the truth. As the plant shook and gravel poured into the hopper, Parker watched from a distance. He felt anger, fear, and a strange sense of disbelief mixing inside him. What if Chris really had found the channel? What if Parker had walked away from a fortune because he trusted numbers more than instinct? Every sound from the wash plant felt heavier than the last, and when Chris finally shut the plant down and pulled the mats, the crew around him fell silent. The mats were full. Not with thin lines of color or scattered flakes, they were loaded with thick, heavy gold, the kind of gold miners dream about but rarely ever touch. A witness filmed the cleanup with shaking hands. The footage spread online faster than either of them expected. People estimated the yield, compared it to early samples, and came to one conclusion. This was not a small find. This was a massive discovery. As word traveled through the mining community, Chris's quiet test run turned into something far bigger. Soon, equipment began disappearing from Parker's main site, not stolen, but moved. A loader, a dozer, and a fuel truck ended up on Chris's claim. Workers admitted that Chris had asked for help. He didn't demand it. He simply explained that he needed a few hands to start something important. And because of the respect he earned over years of steady work, some of them said yes without asking questions. It wasn't until later that those workers realized what they had become part of. Not a small test, not a quiet run, but a full breakaway operation. Parker felt his patience snap. He stormed through camp, demanding answers, piecing together every step Chris had taken. Each clue felt like a cut he never saw coming. Chris had planned this, not out of betrayal or anger, but because he believed in the ground that Parker had abandoned. He believed in the signs. He believed in the deeper layer. While Parker focused on moving forward, Chris focused on looking closer. And now the result of that focus was staring everyone in the face. Chris had his own cut, his own small team, and his own vision. He was not stealing. He was building, and the proof lay in the gold he pulled from the ground, gold richer than anything Parker was currently getting. By the time the hoses were connected and the last bolts tightened on the wash plant Chris set up on his claim, the tension across the entire region could be felt like heat from a fire.
Everyone knew something big was about to happen. The first scoop of pay went into the hopper, and even before it hit the screens, flashes of gold shone in the morning light. When Chris shut the plant down and pulled the mats from his first full cleanup on his new claim, the reaction from the crew around him was instant. They stared at the mats as if time had stopped. The gold was coarse, heavy, thick, and bright. The kind of gold you read about in old-timers' journals. The kind of gold that could turn a small claim into a legend. Chris did not smile. He did not cheer. He simply collected the gold, weighed it, and sealed it away like he expected this all along. And maybe he had. Because moments after he finished the cleanup, 2 unmarked vehicles rolled up the trail. Inside were buyers. Serious buyers who never wasted time. They shook Chris's hand like they had been expecting him. They examined the gold with calm expressions that slowly turned into something close to excitement. They knew this was not an accident. They knew Chris had found something big. And soon, the producers arrived too. Cameras ready, faces tense. They wanted an exclusive interview with Chris. When they sat him down, he spoke clearly and calmly. No fear, no guilt, no hesitation. He said he was now working independently. Then, he placed the legal paperwork on the table. He owned the entire $75 million pay zone. When Chris placed the papers on the table, the air in the room changed. It was the first time the producers had ever seen someone from Parker's crew step forward with full control of a massive claim. They looked at the documents carefully, checking every date, every permit number, and every signature. But everything was clean. Everything was official. Chris had not rushed this. He had planned it with the patience of someone who knew the land better than anyone else. The producers asked him how long he had been working on this. Chris did not brag. He did not try to look like a hero. He simply said he had been testing the ground on his own time whenever Parker's main cut slowed down. He explained how he followed small signs that most miners ignore, like the way the gravel settled after heavy rain, or the strange bend in the tree line where the roots seemed to twist deeper than they should. To most viewers, these details might seem small, but to someone like Chris, they were markers of something hidden below, something worth searching for. He talked about how he noticed a thin layer of clay that did not match the upper layers. That layer made him curious. He wondered if the real channel sat beneath it, untouched. So he kept digging a little deeper each time, learning more about the old stream that once ran through the valley. When he finally hit the real bedrock, everything made sense. The ground was full of trapped gold that had settled there for thousands of years. The producers listened with wide eyes. They had filmed many stories over the years, but something about this moment felt different. It was the calm confidence in Chris's voice. It was the way he talked about the land as if he had been studying it for a lifetime. And it was the fact that he had found something massive without shouting about it, without rushing, and without trying to make anyone else look bad. Meanwhile, Parker learned about the ownership shift through a short message from the mining office. The words were simple, but they hit like a hammer. The claim he believed was empty, the ground he walked away from, was now legally under Chris's name. The value assigned to it was $75 million. That number felt unreal. Parker read it again and again, hoping he had misunderstood something. But the truth stayed the same. He drove out to the claim without telling anyone. As he approached the site, he heard the sound of Chris's wash plant running. The machine had a steady rhythm that echoed across the valley. Parker could see the small crew working with focus, each person knowing their role. They were not racing, they were not shouting, they were simply working with purpose, like they were shaping the start of something big. Chris saw Parker standing near the edge of the cut. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the wash plant and the water flowing over the mats. Parker's eyes moved across the ground, trying to understand what he had missed. He saw the deep cuts, the clean layers, the gold trapped in the lower gravel, and the old channel running in a direction he had never followed. Everything felt like a map he had never learned to read. When they finally spoke, the conversation was slow and heavy. Parker asked how long Chris had been trying to prove the ground was still alive. Chris answered honestly. He had been working on it since the day Parker first showed disappointment in the early results. He explained that he never meant to betray anyone. He simply wanted to follow the signs he believed in. He said he respected Parker, but he could not ignore what the land was showing him. Parker listened quietly. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He just stood there with the look of a man trying to hold himself together. He knew that miners make choices every day, some good, some bad. And this time, he had made the wrong one. He walked away too early, and Chris had stayed behind long enough to see the truth. The moment that made everything real happened when Chris cleaned his mats while Parker watched. The gold that came out was thick and heavy. It rolled across the table like small nuggets of sunlight. Parker stared at the gold, knowing it came from the very ground he once wrote off as useless. It was a painful sight, but it was also proof that Chris had not made wild guesses. He had found something real. When the cleanup finished, a quiet fell over the site. Parker looked at Chris and told him something few expected. He said he was proud of him. The words sounded rough, like they were made of gravel, but they were honest. He told Chris he never thought anyone on the crew would find something like this, especially not in the ground he had walked away from. Chris nodded but did not smile. He did not want to celebrate too early. He knew the work ahead would be long and hard. He also knew that owning a $75 million claim meant pressure he could not ignore. Buyers would call, investors would visit, competitors would try to get close, and every mistake would cost him more than it ever had before. But despite everything, Chris felt calm. For the first time in a long time, he was working on ground that felt like home. Ground he understood. Ground that responded when he treated it with patience. The land had rewarded him for believing in it, and now he had the chance to build something truly his own. When the sun dipped behind the hills and the first day on his new claim came to an end, Chris stood at the edge of the cut and watched the gold reflect the fading light. The valley felt quiet, almost peaceful. The world outside buzzed with talk about his discovery, about the claim, about the sudden shift in ownership. But none of that noise reached him here. All he felt was the steady promise of the earth beneath his feet. The next morning arrived before Chris even had a chance to rest. The sky was still dim when he stepped back onto the claim. Mist rolled across the valley floor like slow-moving breath. It wrapped around the machines, around the fresh cut, and around the small wash plant that had already changed the course of his life. Chris stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting the weight of everything settle inside him. He was no longer working someone else's dream. He was standing on his own. The crew who supported him showed up early too. None of them asked about the drama, the messages online, or the conversations happening back at camp. They didn't ask how Parker
reacted or what the producers planned to do. They simply grabbed their tools and waited for Chris to tell them what needed to be done. It was a small team, but it was enough to start building something real. Chris walked them through the next steps, widening the cut, testing the deeper layers, and planning where the main wash plant would sit once he moved a bigger machine onto the claim. He spoke calmly and clearly, as if he'd been leading his own operation for years. There was no hesitation in his voice. He knew the land, he knew the gold, and he knew what needed to be done to keep the momentum going. As they started digging, the ground responded in a way that felt almost unreal. Every new scoop of gravel revealed more color, more signs that the deeper channel was richer than anyone expected. The dirt had a darker tone, the rocks were smooth and rounded, and the heavy sand held small flashes of gold even before hitting the wash plant. Each bucket felt like another quiet confirmation that Chris had made the right choice by trusting his own instincts. While the machines worked, Chris kept checking the old maps he carried in his pocket. They were worn, creased, and covered in notes that he had written over many long nights. He traced the path of the ancient stream with his finger, matching it to the curves in the land around him. The old channel bent in a strange way, dipping toward a ridge most miners ignored. That ridge, Chris believed, was the key to everything. The gold he had already found was only the start. The main deposit, the heart of the channel, was still ahead. Around noon, Parker returned to the site. This time, he did not come with anger or questions. He came quietly, like someone trying to walk through a memory without disturbing it. The crew glanced at him but kept working. Chris stepped away from the machines and walked over to meet him. Their conversation started slow, with long pauses and careful words. Parker said he wanted to understand how the ground had fooled him. Chris explained again, in simple terms, how the false bedrock had created a trap. It looked solid from above, but was thin enough to break through with a little extra digging. He showed Parker the darker gravel, the smooth stones, and the deep pockets where the gold settled after being released. Had settled over thousands of years. Parker listened closely this time. He did not argue.
He did not defend himself. He just absorbed the truth, piece by piece, like someone replaying